Second presentation of the conference. With the warehouse moving up the value chain by delivering several value-added services, the flow of man, material, integration of processes, and increase in transaction volumes, it's no more a storage box. This brings about the demand for built-to-suit mine specification warehouses for maximization of capacity, efficiency, and productivity, and seamless integration of fit-outs in the overall design. I'd like to invite Mr. Abdul Kader Monla, who is the Director of Capital Markets, MENA, JLL. Abdul Kader Monla is the Director with JLL Capital Markets team in Dubai with coverage responsibility for real estate investment transactions across the MENA region. He has advised clients on sales side and buy side investment opportunities, as well as sales and leaseback and build-to-suit transactions. He structured cross-sectional and variety of asset classes and has held positions across the investment life and advises on transaction across both mature and emerging markets, including Europe, Middle East, and India. Mr. Monla will talk about understanding the build-to-suit warehouse demands and opportunities. Mr. Monla.
Thank you very much for the introduction. It's never easy to be the last speaker before the coffee break, so I'll try to make it as efficient as possible. So for those of you that don't know JLL is a global professional real estate services firm, so we only do real estate, we don't do supply chain, but we do advise many of our clients, which are some of the largest 3PLs, industrial developers, and occupiers across the world. And one of the recurring themes that we are starting to see more and more in this part of the world is build-to-suits. And this is the topic that James touched upon earlier during the panel when we were talking about trends. And so I'm going to give you a bit of more color as to how that market is actually evolving. Now, first of all, what do we mean by build-to-suit? If you walk around Jafza or Kizad or any of the industrial zones here, you'll notice that most of the warehouses are actually owner-occupied. So they're all actually built to the specifications of the owner because they were built by the owners. But what we mean in the investment market is build-to-suit is actually a bit different in that it is a property that was built to the specifications of an occupier, but that was actually developed or funded by a third party. In other words, this is, if you're a warehouse, so if you're a 3PL and you need a warehouse, instead of going out and building it yourself, you develop the specifications, you go to a developer or an investor, they will build it and finance it in full for you in return for a long-term lease agreement. And this is something that we're seeing more and more in this part of the world. It's very common in mature markets, but certainly emerging markets is something new, and especially in this part of the world. Now, why would anyone do a build-to-suit? It's quite simple. First of all, there's a lack of suitable properties, especially in markets such as this one, or across the GCC in Saudi Arabia and other regional markets. So you don't really have a choice. You cannot go out and lease, or they're not necessarily very suitable properties to lease that meet your requirements. You have to build it yourself. Obviously, when you build it yourself, you need something that meets your requirements. It's not too big, it's not too small, not too high, not too low. So actually it allows you to extract the maximum efficiency from that property and enables you to obviously save costs. You don't need any development experience. A lot of the 3PLs and a lot of the occupiers, industrial and logistics occupiers, are not really developers. They don't know how to build a warehouse, and certainly they don't have the experience in building one very cost effectively. Another reason, and this is probably the most important reason, is that no development capital is required. So often, companies don't want to lock their capital in unproductive assets. They'd rather invest it in their core business, whether that's in equipment, machinery, M&A, expansion, debt repayments, etc. So they'd rather have something else come and finance the property for them in return for a long-term lease agreement. And finally, there's no ownership risk. Owning a property has benefits, but it also has risks. And so you're transferring that risk onto the investor. Whereas we also see that a lot with blue chip companies that go into new markets, where they don't necessarily want to put their capital in a market which is risky or considered to have geopolitical risk. So you'd rather transfer that risk onto somebody else. Of course, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Obviously, that comes with a long-term commitment. No one's going to build a warehouse for you unless you're prepared to commit for the very long term that you're going to stay in that warehouse. And usually that's at lease terms of 15 to 20 years at the shortest end. Your CFOs may not necessarily be happy about that because that creates a long-term liability that has to go on your balance sheets. There are ways around that and there are ways to structure, but still that is an issue that has to be considered. The cost element is also very important. Often when you're getting a third-party investor to come in and finance it, it can be quite expensive than if you were to fund it yourself. But obviously there are benefits from a cash flow impact. So you may actually find, even though it's more expensive, it's better because you have a better use of the capital. So you can, if you're invested in your core business, you may make 25, 30% return on investment, whereas in real estate you're making 8, 10, 12% at the most. Obviously there's some loss of control. This is probably one of the main reasons why we haven't seen this trend gain ground quicker in this part of the world, is that a lot of the businesses here are privately owned. And large family institutions in the Middle East tend to prefer to own assets. They like to be masters of their destiny. So selling an asset or having somebody own it is considered as giving up some form of control. Now there are ways around that, and I'll go into some of the structures that we have advised on the various occupiers on, but still that is a bit of a disadvantage. And finally, if you don't get the ownership risk, but at the same time, if there's an appreciation in the value of the property, you don't benefit from that. Now in this region, it's a bit less of a risk. A lot of the industrial properties are built on leased land. So actually, whereas you may own the box on top of the plot, you don't actually own the land. So as you near the end of the lease term, the value of your asset is actually depreciating. So the chances of your value appreciating and value is less unless it's a very long-term land lease or you actually own the land. Now we're talking about warehousing, but there are a lot of other places where these types of structures are used. We are currently advising, for example, a school operator on a build-to-suit in Abu Dhabi. They're in business to manage schools and operate them. They're not into the real estate ownership space. And we see that a lot in other asset classes as well, so long as the asset is a single tenant asset. So there's one tenant. It can be an office building. HSBC and Standard Chartered have done build-to-suit transactions. It can be a school, it can be a hospital. As long as there's a single tenant that's taking the long-term, that's leasing for the long term, then the build-to-suit can be structured. Just a couple of examples in the industrial and warehousing space across the region. Obviously, there have been a lot more, but just to give you a bit of a flavor of 3 different types of build-to-suits. The first is Lulu Hypermarkets. This is a transaction we actually worked on not very long ago, when that asset traded again in the secondary market earlier this year. But Lulu Hypermarkets, for example, when they went into Oman, they decided they didn't want to own the warehouse. So for their main distribution center, serving Muscat and the surrounding region, they decided to go to a developer, asking to build a property that meets their specifications in return for a long-term lease agreement. In this case, it was about 20 years. Another example is Civil Logistics. So just here, not very far from here in Jafza, they don't typically own properties across the world. So they, again, in 2010, went to Jafza and to a developer and asked them to build a warehouse to their specifications, again in return for a 20-year lease agreement. And finally, a transaction that we helped structure is a bit different, because that's a hybrid. So that's the new Jaguar Land Rover headquarters in Dubai, Dubai Silicon Oasis, which is not warehousing. It's a mix of warehousing, training center, and office space. And again, they chose not to own the asset. They'd rather lease it because they'd rather deploy their capital elsewhere in their business. Now, not to get too much into the details, but really how does it work? Well, essentially the first step is the occupier, the tenant, prepares the specifications. Now, these can be very detailed, so all of the fit outs, everything that they need. We help them find a real estate investor and structure the transaction. The real estate investor or developer will actually fully build and fully finance the property to the tenant specifications. The occupier will then return into a long-term lease agreement, usually before the development actually starts. And then finally, for the term of the lease, the occupier will be paying rent to the investor, which actually owns the asset. He's the landlord. Now, a slight variation of this, a cousin to this structure, is the sale and leaseback, and that applies to existing properties. So in cases where there already is a warehouse, and the tenant wants to release cash. And this, we've seen a tremendous amount of demand for that across the region, where tenants are looking at alternative finance options. Just like they go out to the banks to get debt, or their shareholders, they're looking at their portfolios and their balance sheet and saying, how can we raise capital by keeping the assets, but trying to monetize those so we can reinvest in our business? And it's essentially the same concept. So the occupier will sell the property to an investor. They will get 100% of the sale proceeds, so they get the value of the asset, as opposed to bank financing where you only get 50, 60, 70% of the value of the asset. The occupier obviously will enter into long-term lease agreement, usually for sale and lease backs is no less than 10 years, and then they'll pay the rent on an annual basis for the remainder of the lease term. A couple of sale and lease backs that happened in the region in recent years. Part of the hypermarkets, which is the largest supermarket chain in Saudi Arabia. In 2010, they sold their main distribution center for all of Saudi Arabia. That's 90,000 square meters. As a matter of fact, in the same transaction, they also did a sale and leaseback on all of their retail stores. So actually, it's they don't own or they own very little real estate in Saudi Arabia anymore. Same thing happened with Safi Danone. They needed to monetize their assets. They did a sale and leaseback on their headquarters in their Riyadh distribution center. Transport Logistics is a transaction we closed just 2 weeks ago. So this is not very far from here in Jafsa. So again, Transport needed to expand and wanted some cash to reinvest in their business. So we helped them structure a sale and leaseback for that. And finally, just to give you an example, these sale and leasebacks also happen for properties with significant tenant improvements, such as cold storage, or highly customized facilities. Slightly different structures, usually longer lease terms because they're very specific to the tenants, but they can be structured as well. Now, I won't go into all of the details, but essentially what involves getting a build-to-suit done. Now, every build-to-suit is different, because every tenant's requirements are very different. So every deal is going to be different. There isn't a cookie-cutter template that you can apply to every deal, because every occupier is different, and every investor is different. And they have different requirements and specifications. Some of the main factors we look at is, first of all, the type of facility. So the more customized the facility is, the more difficult it will be to do a sale and lease or a build-to-suit, or the investor will require more security in the form of a long-term lease or no guarantees from the occupier. Because essentially they're afraid that if something happens to the occupier and they leave the facility, well, how am I going to find a tenant that has the exact same requirements? So that could be, if you're building a highway warehouse, that would be considered very specific. If you want improvements such as refrigeration or specialized HVAC systems, then these are things that have to be taken into consideration. The occupational lease term, if you sign a lease for 10 years, 15, 20, 30, that affects the pricing that an occupier is going to get in a build-to-suit. The land tenure, so is the land owned or is the land leased? So in many parts of the UAE, you cannot actually own land. So if you have a DWC or Jafsa, Kizad, amongst others, you lease the land. And how long is the lease term? Is it a 15-year ground lease, 20, longer than that? Obviously, the longer the ground lease, the more the investor is comfortable, so the better the pricing. It's a mix of negotiation that happens between the occupier, the investor, as well as the owner of the land in the case of a leasehold. So we often have discussions with the authorities, whether that's JLL, Free Zone, or others. The availability of capital, so each tenant has different requirements. Sometimes the tenant has capital, so he doesn't need something to build it immediately. He may need the capital in later stages, and that affects the structure that's to be used, and I'll go into that in a minute. The operational and strategic requirements of the tenant, whether they have development experience or not, can they do it themselves, or do they need the developer to step in and build the asset for them? And future expansion. Often we have occupiers that come in and say, look, I want, for example, a 20,000 square meter facility today, but I want in the next 5 years to have the ability to expand that by an additional 10,000 square meters. So that has to be built into the agreement with the investor, because the investor is going to have to fund that in the future. That brings a bit of complexity, but it can be worked around. Now, there's different types of built-to-suit structures, and really it's all about the risk. Where is the risk? The risk with the occupier, or is it being transferred on to the developer or investor? And that has a direct impact on pricing. So if we just take the first column, the build and sell, this is a structure which we've seen where the occupier actually wants complete control over the development. So what they tell us is, I have the specifications, I'll build it, I'll finance it, but I don't want to own it long term. So on the day that the property is completed, find me an investor, or even before, and sell it to them. So it's just essentially build a facility, and they do an immediate sale and lease back after that. In this structure, the occupier is taking the full risk. If it costs more to build the property, it's their risk. If there's any delays, they're taking on that risk. So the cost is the cheapest for them because the investor is taking the minimum amount of risk. Further up the risk curve, you have an occupier driven build to suit. So again here the occupier is saying, I want to build my own warehouse, I have my own development team, or I want to deal directly with the contractor, but I don't have the capital, or I don't want to invest in this facility. So you find me somebody that comes and just finances it, and then owns it long term, but I will handle the development aspect, and I'll take that development risk. The price here will be a little bit higher than in the first option. And then the last option, which is the other extreme end of the spectrum, the occupier only has the specifications. He hands the plans over to the investor or developer, tells him, you go out, build it, finance it, give you the keys at completion. You have 2 years to build it for me. We agree on the rent on day one, and if it costs more, it's the investor's risk. He's just going to make less money on the development. If it costs less, it's his, the upside is his, but the occupier doesn't want to take any risk. In this case, the investor obviously will have to price that risk into his equation. So the risk of the occupier actually declines, the risk of the investor increases with, as we go across the spectrum, obviously the cost of the occupier increases. So this is a very simplistic view. There's a lot of factors that need to be taken into consideration as well. So how is the lease structured? Most of the build-to-suits, they're long-term leases, so 15, 20, 25, even 30 years, if not longer. And they're structured in what we call triple net leases, or fully repairing and insuring. What that means is that the occupier is responsible for all the costs. Whether that's maintenance, repairs, insurance, it's as if they own the property. The landlord just gets the check every quarter or every 6 months or a year, depending on the agreement, and he doesn't have to do anything. He just gets the check, the rent, and the occupier actually manages everything. Which is good because often the occupier doesn't want people to come into his warehouse that he hasn't approved of. He wants to be responsible for his own security, maintenance, repairs, etc. He has his own equipment. So it's as if he owns the property. Sometimes the insurance is transferred over to the landlord, but at least the maintenance and the operating expenses, the utilities due, etc., are all borne by the occupier. Continuing on to the lease structure, this is really where it gets very complex because each lease is obviously structured differently for each occupier. And some of the things that we help advise, or we advise on, are the lease terms I mentioned, the escalation structure. So every year, how much is the rent going to increase? Is it going to be yearly? Is it going to be 5 years? Is it going to be inflation indexed, minimums, maximum, etc.? Payment frequency, as I mentioned. So how often is the rental paid? The ability to sublease, which decreases the risk on the occupier. Let's say in 5 years they don't need the full space and they want to sublease it to other parties. Renewal options, future expansions I have mentioned, and buyback options. So sometimes we see occupiers that say, look, I want you to own it, but I want to have the option of potentially buying that property in 5 years or 10 years in the future when I have more capital, or if I determine that it's in my strategic interest to own the property. Maintaining control is a theme that we see across, it's very common here in the Middle East. As I had mentioned, a lot of, especially local groups, like to own their real estate. They consider it a strategic asset. They like to have a title deed with their name on it. They know that nothing's going to happen. But when they do decide to go for a build-to-suit, there are various ways that we can help them mitigate that loss of control. Some of them are long-term leases, so minimum is 15 years, but they may even choose to opt for a longer-term lease because they don't want any risk that in 15, 20 years they get kicked out of the property. Right of first refusal, so in the case of the property is sold by the investor, as usually happens, and they have a right of first regard, so they can go in and buy it before that property is sold to a third party. Sale restrictions, very common. So often in build-to-suits and sale and leasebacks, the tenant will actually require they'll put in a lease agreement restriction on the owner so that they're not allowed to ever sell the property to one of their competitors. So if it's let's say it's a supermarket chain, they don't want the property to be sold to Carrefour because obviously they may have it's a competitor that would be strategically a very bad result. So the owner is restricted in terms of who they can sell the property to or not. Buyback options, as I had mentioned, if they want to purchase a property or have the option to purchase a property at any point in the future. Reversion of lease maturity, so sometimes it's even where, and this is a very different financing structure where the tenant and the owner agree that they're going to pay, let's say, rent for the next 25 years, and in 25 years the property reverts, the ownership reverts to the occupier. So that's built into the rent. It's as if they're paying for that property. Instead of building it up front, they're paying for it over the next 25 years. So these are essentially all of the factors that we look at when we're advising clients on build-to-suit. As I had mentioned, it is becoming a very recurring theme that we're getting more and more occupiers and potential tenants that are coming knocking on our door to try to explore various options where they can either use build-to-suits for their expansion because they either don't have the capital or would rather invest it elsewhere, or they already have existing assets and want to engage in sale and leasebacks. And this is not just from local groups, but international blue chip tenants, where if they look at their, in Europe or in mature markets such as the US and elsewhere in Asia, they don't actually own real estate, but they have been forced to own their real estate in this market because it's simply they couldn't find anything that they could lease. So they were forced 5, 10, 15 years ago to build the property, but actually on the long term, that's not really their objective. So they come to us and tell us, how can you help me release cash from my assets so that I can reinvest it into my business? So this is the end of my session. I just wanted to open it up for questions if anyone has any queries or wants more information. One thing to note is some of my colleagues may have dropped off some documentation on your tables that provides additional information on these types of structures. Feel free to take these at home if you wish as well. Thank you.